Let us begin with prayer. O loving God, make quiet within us all other voices but your own, that we may open our hearts and our ears to your Spirit as we worship together now. Amen. I find myself in an awkward position this morning. I don't know what to say. Does anyone know a story about wisdom? That's what I've been thinking about this week as my meditation on these words that Laura read for us from Paul's first letter to the community in Corinth. I'm scared to fail you today. I know a lot of you are in despair of different kinds: global, national, personal. Lately, I've been listing out some of those despairs of the world to start the sermon, but I find I just don't have it in me today. I chose this text from Paul because we're studying this whole letter in Bible study, but Paul feels especially obtuse here. And I am craving just a good old-fashioned story, maybe a bit of the Sermon on the Mount, or a nice pep talk, or a bit of righteous indignation from one of the prophets. But here we are. I dare say that part of my worry is that there is a lot of pressure on us all. Christian communities and Christian clergy are being increasingly pressed to stand up, to speak truth to power, to do something, to change the world and be quick about it. I find myself constantly wondering for our church and my own person how we are to right-size our actions these days. It really hit me hard when Bishop Rod Hirschfield, the Episcopal Church, spoke in Concord, New Hampshire during a vigil for Renee Good. And he called out the cruelty and injustice and the horror unleashed in Minneapolis, something I agree with him about, and warned his clergy to prepare for a new era of Christian martyrdom and encouraged clergy to prepare their wills. I appreciate the warning and the danger, but I worry deeply about an idea of a new era of Christian martyrdom. I wonder if I really understand what that means. I wonder if I have enough sense of history and theology of martyrdom to make good decisions. Or if when I hear that phrase, I am following a slightly misguided, amplified, put down your nets and follow me, no matter what, without rounding out my theology. This intersection is one of the places where I could use a little help from the Spirit to buoy me up in my limited human understanding. You see, I want to be sure that I'm putting my life not in the hands of human wisdom, but in the power of God, as Paul would put it. And these ideas worry me further because there is so much anger all around us, and some of it is very healthy. But even at its healthiest, I try not to act out of my anger. And I was very moved by an opinion piece in the Times this week by Roxane Gay, who asserted, We cannot demand justice for our undocumented neighbors or rage against senseless murders, and in the next breath call for our enemies to die. She goes on to say, we do not have to adopt their tactics or mimic their lack of character or decency or stymie their efforts. She says, I am not suggesting anything along the lines of going high when they go low. I am not suggesting that if we just try to understand them, they will see the error of their ways. Instead, I am saying that we don't have to compromise ourselves, our values, or our sense of justice to fight back. And it is so easy to lose sight of this, to allow our justifiable rage to damage our moral compass. Oof. Well said. Isn't that the truth? But it's also a little harder than we might like to admit, isn't it, to keep our moral compass steady right now? Paul's vulnerability in this letter is a reminder about the limitations of human wisdom. May be helpful today after all. Remember how he said, I came to you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. You know, this first letter to the Corinthians is an interesting letter and a good starting place if you have never read many of Paul's letters. One of the letters that scholars feel certain Paul wrote, it was probably set in the community of Corinth sometime in the mid-50s of the Common Era, making it also one of the earliest writings in the New Testament, written even before the Gospels. I mention this point because I use the word community for a reason. You see, there is no Christianity the way we understand it at the time when this letter is written. And there really are not any churches, per se, not the way we think about what a church is, or even communities linked across and upon an agreed set of beliefs. These folks that Paul is talking to are still trying to figure all of that out. And they're trying to figure it out is no doubt why they have so many questions. People who followed Jesus' teachings gathered primarily around table fellowship. They heard teachings and heard letters like this one that we heard this morning. They prayed and they shared the Lord's Supper, which Paul talks about later in this letter. But in the middle of the first century, this little table fellowship of followers of Jesus was fragile. There's no agreed upon creeds, there's no agreed upon Bible in the first century. Yet these folks are willing to come and share stories and a meal together. Their hearts conceived something, but what? Something different than the Roman Empire. A meal to reset their moral compass, a place of questions, and tying their unknown to the depths of God's mystery. I keep asking myself this week, where have I experienced wisdom over the course of my life? And I was a little surprised at the answer, although it came with great clarity, because you know me, you know I'm a book person and a writer, so I expected it would be something with written words, but it was not. The wisdom that grounds me comes from the experiences shared around the tables of my life, from my youth to my present. I found my mind and my heart especially interested in the large, round, deeply warped wood table that sat in the center of our closed-in porch when I was growing up. We lived around that table. Maybe you know tables like this. It was around that table, snapping the tails off of beans, that I heard the story of my mother doing the same thing while crying and telling my grandmother that she had discovered that she was pregnant again at 40 with me. Around that table, I played tic-tac-toe with my grandfather while he taught me his lyrics to The Bear Went Over the Mountain. Not usually a song that inspires tears, but there you have it. Around that table, I learned the wisdom of the natural world. We canned tomatoes and corn and made applesauce. And I learned the wisdom of living things as we nursed kittens and watched tadpoles grow legs in a fishbowl. That table was adorned with tools and gloves and bicycle chains, with sandwiches and vegetables and extra pots and pans and birds' nests that had fallen from their perches in our yard. I could go on and on. But lest you think that I am just falling into nostalgia and I'm going to give you a big pat on the back about how great the good old days were and if we could just get back there, hear me out. That's not what I mean. I don't mean something nostalgic. The wisdom I learned there was the wisdom of gathering ourselves together and living through the days and the seasons. The wisdom I know from that experience, I try to bring into my own home and work. And there's not a lesson beyond the lesson of learning how to be together in God's presence. My kitchen table in my home today is that same kind of all-purpose space. When my youngest daughter has an art assignment at school, it is an acrylic studio. When I have a sermon to write, like this weekend, it is my desk. When my older daughter is making dinner, it is a place of feasting. Think about the gatherings here at this old church. Bible study or coffee and theologians or prayer writing or deacons. That table in the library is a place of gathering. Presbyterian women, the worship circle with our families with young children, our student choristers rehearsals, our choir rehearsals. We gather weekly to worship like we're doing right now, and once a month, like we did last week, we gather around this table. And there is a lot more wisdom in this room than we give ourselves credit for. I believe we have a special way of gathering, a deep root of who we are together that frames our table gatherings in a powerful way. And to lift up Paul's idea in 1 Corinthians, when we gather, the Spirit breaks us open to God's wisdom that is within each one of us. It is not something we hear or see. In fact, we can't even conceive it, Paul says. But nonetheless, it is promised to us. God has revealed to us through the Spirit, Paul says, for the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. That Spirit is what we come together around. Priya Parker, who some of you may know about, wrote the book, The Art of Gathering, tells a story about a friend and a gathering that friend had years ago who needed help leaving a job that she was stuck in. And so that friend invited 8 friends over and asked, would you come? And would you bring me a piece of art or poetry or song, anything that gives you courage? Parker describes her experience of that gathering by saying that part of what she did when we all got this beautiful gift of everyone else's ways that they are courageous, she reified our own identity, our own sense of self. Like, wow, she thinks of me as courageous, Parker says. And she continues, I still think about that day when I am terrified of making a decision that sounds scary. I think about the poems that were read at that gathering 15 years ago. Today, we can draw on our own courage and share them around this space. We can go back almost 2,000 years and say, wow, Paul was reminding people how to keep their moral compass when life was not easy in the Roman Empire. Paul was trying to put words to why their gathering was so important. And that's still so important for us to hear today. Let me finish with an idea that might help us think about how to gather around our tables here at this church. I recently saw a zine by a graphic artist named Christine Tyler Hill about the 4 wings of movement collaboration. It was written by Leah Penniman of the Soulfire Farm. Imagine a butterfly with 4 wing sections, 2 on each side, but the butterfly needs all 4 wings to fly. And a movement like the Jesus movement of the first century or the Jesus movement of today also needs all 4 parts. We need to gather around the tables of this community and talk about resistance. I know that Sally Collins is already gathering some people to do this. We need protests and marches, but we also need to gather around the tables of this church as builders. We need good thinkers to create new systems for our church and the world. And we need reformers. We should be good at this, no? These are people who can work within the current structures and continue to promote change. And we need healers. We need arts and music and storytellers. We need all of these things. We need hand holders. But I also want to just remind you, no one needs to do all of these things. We can trust the Spirit to bring us together. And if you aren't sure which of these suits you, or where you are on any day changes, or you're just stuck, that's okay. Just come to the table. I know a group of people who are willing to send some courage your way. And together, we can right-size our response to the needs of the world without compromising who we are. And I'll end where I began today, because I truly meant it when I asked earlier. I need you all to hold the questions with me, to remind me to be open to the movement of the Spirit. So would you come? Would you come and bring one experience that you've had that speaks of God's wisdom? You are needed. You are needed.